And I came across one I did, it had to be at least 9 years ago, about installing an LPG stove on the sailboat, or propane stove. I guess it's basically the same thing. I got this stove through Seaward by Whale, and the Princess model. It's a great stove. But I don't think that Seaward by Whale is making that size stove, an LPG stove, anymore. So I kind of wanted to do a little update on this. Now, the procedures and the Coast Guard regulations, they haven't really changed on how to install this type of a stove. So let's go through the process. It really wasn't that difficult. The most difficult part I wanted to check with Ed, the service manager. At that time it was the Sailing Emporium. Now it's Haven Harbor South, I think. But Ed's very knowledgeable in this, and the wiring wasn't that difficult, but I did need a little guidance on it. Well, here's how the process went, and it worked out really great. Well, now when installing the LPG stove, if you're replacing a stove, it's not as difficult. But if you're putting a new one in, like I'm doing, there's a few things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, LPG gas is heavier than air. So it can, if you have a leak, it could settle into your bilge area or into your cabin compartment and become a very explosive type of thing. So the American Boat and Yacht Council and the European boating industry have come up with some basic standards to help make this safer. The first one is that the tank needs to be in a separate tank locker that's airtight, but also has a drain and discharges overboard. You don't want this gas to discharge into your bilge area, of course. You need to get it off of the boat if you have a leak. So that's one challenge, is finding the right place where you can put this locker to where the drain, which has to be at the bottom, can drain overboard. Next thing is, there needs to be an emergency shut-off switch that runs a solenoid that is built into the LPG locker. And when you place that, it's advisable to have it close to the stove, but not to where, if there was a fire or a flare-up, that it wouldn't be difficult to reach that switch. Now, another thing when installing the stove, if you're replacing a current stove, more than likely the brackets are going to be there, but they may not be quite in the right place. What you want to do is, say here's the side where you're going to install the stove. You don't want the burners below that, because if you put a pan on there and the flame comes out, well, it could hit the side of that. You want that to be just a little higher than the sides of the compartment where it's fitting. So if you follow these basic rules and requirements, you'll be able to install your LPG stove safely and have a great cooking surface. Well, I didn't have space below deck and still have the drain supply going down and out, but this cockpit cabin arrangement worked out well for me. Now, just a word of caution: if your boat's in the water, be sure you know where the water line is before you start drilling holes. I even drilled a small test hole first. Also, be sure to use a reinforced hose so that it doesn't crimp. And I tested it with a little water to make sure it drained properly. Next, I hooked up the supply hose in the LPG locker. It goes through this airtight fitting and then to the tank. Now, these are compression fittings, so don't use Teflon tape on them. There is a LPG gas tape, but you don't need it on the compression fittings. Just get them nice and tight. And then test the fittings with some soap, not a match or a lighter, or you could use a can of gas leak spray. Well, after removing the current setup, I followed the directions for placing the swivel mounts, patched the old holes. Now, before you put the stove in place, attach the gas supply line. Now the unit comes with a set of pot holders. You can always order additional ones. So I'm at the Sailing Emporium with Ed, the service manager, to get a little advice to make sure I don't blow myself up. Ed, thank you. What am I doing with this thing?
Okay, all you would do with this is bring your, you have a new breaker on the panel, marked propane or stove. Bring that positive wire from the breaker into the switch, into this wire here, which is on the back side of the 5-amp fuse. Okay, then once you bring that in, it energizes the fuse, it jumps off the fuse and goes over here to the switch. All right, and on the switch, you will come from here down to the solenoid. The solenoid has 2 yellow wires on it. It's reverse polarity, so it doesn't matter which one you pick, but one of these will go to the positive right off of here, and the other yellow one you will run to the negative. You run to your ground strip on the back of the panel.
Okay, and then what about this little thing here? That's a second?
That also is a ground just for this light to show that it's energized. So you're running a negative from the grounding strip up to this to ground the 12-volt side of the light.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Now when I connected the wires, I crimped them and then I used the shrink wrap to help waterproof them. So now I just want to be really clear on the wiring of the solenoid control, because this was, to me, the most complicated part of it, but it's really very easy. So here I have the DC panel with the breakers and the negative bus bar, the solenoid control. This is the 5-amp fuse. It's got a red wire coming to it, and then there's another red wire that jumps over to the switch, and off of that is another red wire that just goes out. And then there's the light, and that has a black wire to it, and it has a red wire that comes over to the switch. On the solenoid, there's 2 yellow wires, as Ed indicated. So what I did is I took one of the yellow wires and I attached a red wire to that, and then I attached that to the red wire on the switch. On the other yellow wire, I put a green wire, because that's what I had, and I ran that directly to the negative bus bar on the DC panel. Back on the switch, where this red wire came from, I attached another red wire, and I ran that to my breaker labeled stove. This black wire, I didn't have a black wire, so I used blue, but I attached a blue wire to this, and I ran this to the negative bus bar. Now you can put these 2 wires together on the same bus bar, is what I did. So as you can see, this is really pretty easy once you understand how it's done. Well, now I have everything hooked up. It's ready to fire up the stove and start cooking. So here you can see how it all went together. I've been using it now for over 9 years. No problems with it, no gas leaks. Everything is working great. Well, until next time, guys, happy and safe boating to you, your family, and friends.